All the staff avoided the rude billionaire until the new waitress stood her ground the first time I saw him. My stomach dropped like a lead weight. He wasn't just rich, he was the kind of billionaire whose name alone could make headlines across the country. And everyone in the restaurant, every single staff member, knew it. But so did everyone else. He was ruthless. Loud, demanding, and cruel in ways that made the other waiters shrink back the moment he walked in. I'd been warned during my interview. He's difficult, the manager whispered, lowering his voice. But if you handle him, you'll be remembered forever. I smiled politely, nodded, but inside, a spark of defiance lit me up. I didn't come here to shrink or cower. I came here because I had bills, yes, but also because I had a sense of pride I wouldn't trade for anything. By my second day, the rumors were confirmed. He berated servers over tiny mistakes, a slightly crooked napkin, water poured too slowly, the wrong spoon for a dessert. People tiptoed around him, avoided eye contact, and muttered under their breath. The kitchen staff whispered in corners about his legendary temper, and the managers practically flinched every time he approached. But when I finally served him, something inside me refused to crumble. As he glared at me over his custom-made suit, I met his eyes evenly. There was tension, a spark that made the air thick, but I didn't step back. Something about his arrogance made me want to challenge him, to see if anyone could really match him. And deep down, I felt an odd curiosity. Who was the man behind the rage, and why did he behave like this? I had no idea that by standing my ground that day, I would change not just his life, but mine as well, forever. It was a Monday morning when I first walked through the doors of La Belle Vie, the upscale restaurant in the heart of the city. The polished floors gleamed under the morning sunlight, and the scent of freshly baked bread and roasted coffee beans filled the air. The staff moved with precise efficiency, each person performing their role like a perfectly rehearsed dance. I took a deep breath and adjusted the crisp white apron over my uniform. My stomach twisted, not from nerves, but anticipation. I had worked in restaurants before, but nothing like this. Nothing like La Belle Vie. And certainly nothing like him. His name was Vincent Carlisle. Billionaire. Owner of multiple companies, yachts, and private islands. And according to everyone I had asked, a nightmare as a customer. He had a reputation that preceded him, rude, impatient, and feared by every single staff member. I had heard the stories even before my interview. Servers quitting mid-shift, managers in tears after encounters with him, whispered tales of tantrums so terrifying they seemed almost cinematic. But curiosity had a way of overriding fear, and I couldn't resist stepping into the storm. My first shift started uneventfully, serving tables at the far end of the dining room. I was focused, attentive, and careful, making sure every detail was perfect. Then, as if on cue, the door swung open, and he walked in. Vincent Carlisle. Every head in the room subtly shifted. The air seemed to tremble. People moved out of his path. Even the maitre d' faltered as he approached the host's station. And there he was in all his imposing glory, tall, impeccably dressed, sharp eyes scanning the room like a predator assessing its prey. I was assigned his table. My heart pounded, but I squared my shoulders. This was my moment. He didn't smile, not even a little. He tapped his fingers on the table impatiently as I approached. Water. Ice-free. Sparkling. And make it quick, he said, his voice a low growl. Yes, sir, I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my stomach. The staff whispered from the sidelines, eyes wide, expecting me to falter. But I didn't. I set the water down with a measured smile. Here you go, sir. Sparkling water, ice-free. Would you like a lemon slice with that? For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. He studied me, his sharp gaze piercing through my composure. Then, unexpectedly, he smirked just slightly. It wasn't approval, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. You're new, he said, almost as if testing me. I am, I replied, and I intend to do my job well, sir. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, quickly replaced by his usual stern demeanor. Most people try to tiptoe around me, he muttered. Why don't you? I met his gaze steadily. Because I'm not afraid of doing my job properly, I said. There was a pause, a moment of tension so thick it could have been sliced with a knife. And then something unexpected happened. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing, not in anger but in curiosity. It was the first time anyone in that room had stood their ground with Vincent Carlisle. And I could see it in his expression. Surprise, intrigue, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of respect beginning to form. The rest of the day wasn't easy. He found reasons to complain, to test my patience, to push my limits. But with every request, I remained composed. Every challenge he threw at me, I met with professionalism and quiet confidence. By the end of the shift, whispers circulated among the staff. They looked at me differently now. Not with the usual fear or disdain reserved for new hires dealing with him, but with curiosity, and maybe even a little admiration. I didn't realize it at the time, but standing up to him that day had started something far bigger than a simple restaurant shift. Something that would change the dynamics of the entire restaurant. Something that would gradually chip away at the armor of a man who had never had anyone challenge him. And as I clocked out that evening, tired but satisfied, I had a feeling in my chest that this was only the beginning. The next morning, a strange energy filled the restaurant. Whispers flitted through the kitchen and dining room like restless ghosts. "Did you see her yesterday?" She actually didn't flinch. I've never seen him so curious. Even the seasoned waiters, who had learned to move invisibly around Vincent Carlisle, looked at me differently. Some with suspicion, others with a hesitant glimmer of hope. It didn't take long for Vincent to arrive again, precisely at 11, as if he had a sixth sense for when I would be on shift. He entered the restaurant with the same commanding presence, but this time, his gaze scanned the room with something more deliberate. It was almost as if he were hunting for trouble, or perhaps testing me. When I approached his table, he didn't bother with a greeting. Instead, he leaned forward, hands clasped tightly on the polished surface. "You handled yourself yesterday," he said, voice even, not harsh, but not warm either. "I'd like to see if that was luck." I met his eyes evenly. "I don't believe in luck, sir," I said softly. "I just do my best." A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "We'll see about that." What followed was nothing short of a trial. He demanded the most complicated dishes, the rarest wines, and the tiniest details executed perfectly. Every time I returned to his table, he scrutinized my movements like a hawk, searching for a slip, a mistake, anything to assert his dominance. "You called that medium rare." "I've had 3 chefs in Paris who would laugh at that," he barked during lunch service. "I apologize, sir," I said calmly, setting down the plate. "Would you like me to have the kitchen adjusted immediately?" He paused, and for the first time, his eyes betrayed something fragile beneath the cold exterior. A flicker of frustration, yes, but also something else. Vulnerability. Loneliness, perhaps. "No," he muttered. "Leave it." It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed. Most people would have missed it entirely. I chose not to comment, merely giving him the space he didn't know he needed. Meanwhile, the staff watched from the sidelines. Their expressions ranged from awe to disbelief. For years, Vincent had been untouchable. Everyone tiptoed, everyone flinched, but I hadn't. And it was starting to change the atmosphere. The kitchen staff whispered among themselves, "Maybe she can handle him." The servers glanced at me as if I had become some sort of secret weapon, someone who dared to stand in the path of a storm without getting swept away. The day wore on with mounting tension. Orders came fast and furious, and every request from Vincent felt like a test, not just of skill, but of patience and resolve. He criticized, he questioned, he sighed heavily when he thought I wasn't looking. Yet I continued, steady and precise, refusing to let my nerves betray me. At one point, he leaned forward, voice dropping low. "You're different from the others." I kept my composure. "Different how, sir?" "Strong. Unafraid. You don't run," he said, almost to himself. Then, louder, "Most people do. They crumble, they beg forgiveness for tiny mistakes." I felt a pang of sympathy mixed with curiosity. "Maybe they're just tired of being treated unfairly," I offered gently. "It's not easy being in a place where someone's anger can hit you at any moment." He regarded me silently, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. There was a pause, as if he were wrestling with words he had never spoken aloud before. "You understand," he muttered finally, almost bitterly. "No one else does. They just leave me to my rage." It was the first crack in the armor I had glimpsed, a man who wielded wealth and power like a weapon, but beneath it, someone painfully human. His hand twitched slightly on the table, a small, almost imperceptible sign of anxiety or restraint. The rest of the day continued with this delicate dance of tension. He pushed, I stood firm. He tested, I adapted. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos, a subtle shift occurred. He no longer looked at me with pure challenge or annoyance. Instead, his gaze softened, conflicted and searching, as though he were seeing a reflection of himself he had long ignored. By the time my shift ended, exhaustion weighed on my shoulders, but I felt a quiet triumph. I had survived the storm, yes, but more than that, I had sparked a change. I didn't know it yet, but Vincent Carlyle had never met anyone like me. And I had never met anyone who made me so curious, so unsettled, and so determined to see what lay beneath the surface of his blinding arrogance. As I clocked out, a small group of staff lingered, whispering and stealing glances at me. One of the servers, an older man named Marco, leaned close. You're something else, kid. Most would have folded by now. I smiled, tired but confident. I just won't let fear dictate my actions. That's all. And as I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The storm was far from over, but something inside both of us had changed, and neither of us would be the same again. The restaurant had never felt so quiet. Not quiet in the sense of emptiness, but the kind of silence that hums with unspoken tension, where every footstep, every clink of cutlery carries weight. It was a Thursday evening, and the dining room was polished and busy, yet there was an undercurrent, something different today. Vincent Carlyle had arrived earlier than usual. Normally, he strode in with all the confidence of a man who owned the world, his presence demanding attention. Tonight, however, he seemed hesitant, not in his walk or posture, but in the way his eyes lingered, scanning the room as though searching for someone or something. I was assigned his table again, my stomach a bundle of nerves and adrenaline. Over the past few days, the tension between us had built steadily, a delicate push and pull that neither of us could, or wanted, to ignore. His challenges had grown sharper, more precise, almost personal, and I had met each one head-on, refusing to crumble. When I approached, he didn't issue a command immediately. Instead, he studied me for a long moment, eyes narrowing, as if deciding whether I was worth his time. Then he leaned forward, voice quieter than usual. "You're not like the others," he said, almost a whisper, almost lost in the hum of the room. "I know," I replied, matching his intensity with calm resolve. "And neither are they." He smirked faintly, but didn't reach his eyes. There was something heavier there, an edge of frustration, but also something softer. Something like vulnerability. "I've had people like you before," he said slowly, each word measured. "They think they can stand up to me. They last a day, maybe two. Then they quit. Or break down. I'm not like them," I said, taking a careful step closer. "I've had to stand up to worse than you in my life. And I won't back down just because someone's rich or powerful." For the first time, I saw him flinch, not physically, but inside, behind his carefully curated walls. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally said, voice tight, "You have no idea what it's like to have people afraid of you all the time. To have everyone walk on eggshells around you, always," his words faltered. "Always expecting the worst from you." I softened my tone, sensing the fragile thread beneath his arrogance. "Then maybe what you need isn't people who fear you," I said quietly, "but someone who sees you. Someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't run." His gaze bore into mine, sharp and unreadable. A storm of conflicting emotions flashed across his face, anger, disbelief, maybe even awe. You actually look me in the eye," he muttered. "Most people can't. They break." "Because you've never been seen for who you are," I said gently. "Not really." There was silence for a long moment. Then he did something no one had ever done. He leaned back, uncharacteristically vulnerable, and exhaled sharply. "I didn't realize how lonely it could be," he admitted. The words were rough, like gravel slipping through his mouth. To always be the one in control. To have to project this image. I nodded, keeping my voice calm but firm. "You're human, Vincent. And humans need connection, not fear. Not constant pressure. You've built walls, but they're just walls." His eyes softened in a way that was almost imperceptible. There was a flicker of relief, but also unease. "And you think you can get past them?" "I know I can," I said simply. "If you let me." The moment hung between us, thick and fragile. Around us, the restaurant moved in a muted rhythm. But for that instant, everything else faded. The noise, the bustling tables, even the staff who watched from a distance, they all disappeared from my consciousness. It was just him and me, a billionaire who had spent a lifetime feared, and a waitress who refused to bow. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table, and said quietly, almost reluctantly, "You're different. I don't know why. I've never met anyone like you." "I don't need to be like anyone else," I replied. "Neither do you." For the first time, he smiled, a small, tentative smile that didn't carry arrogance or superiority. It was a human smile, fragile and uncertain but real. And in that instant, I realized something profound. Beneath all the power, the wealth, the reputation, Vincent Carlyle was just a man. A man who had been hiding behind fear and anger for far too long. And maybe, just maybe, he had finally met someone brave enough to stand beside him without fear. As I walked away to attend the next table, I felt a shift, not just in him, but in the entire room. The staff, who had watched silently from afar, exchanged glances. There was a whisper of hope now, a spark that maybe things could change. And deep down, I knew that this was more than a job, more than a challenge. It was the beginning of something neither of us had expected. Something that could change both our lives forever. The week passed like a whirlwind. Each shift brought new challenges, and each challenge tested not just my patience, but Vincent Carlyle's. The staff had begun to notice subtle changes in him. Where there had once been cold detachment and barely concealed disdain, now there were flickers of something softer, something unguarded. I noticed it most when he arrived for lunch on Friday. Normally, he would stride in, gaze sweeping over the room like a storm cloud, every step calculated to assert dominance. Today, however, he hesitated at the door, almost imperceptibly, as though weighing whether to enter. His eyes, sharp and calculating as ever, searched the room, and then they met mine. For a moment, he seemed uncertain. "Good afternoon, sir," I said, approaching his table with a calm, steady demeanor. "Would you like your usual?" He studied me silently for a long beat, then nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Yes, thank you," he said, his tone quieter than usual, lacking the usual edge of command. Even the words felt cautious, like a man dipping a toe into unfamiliar waters. As I took his order, I noticed the staff watching from afar, whispering under their breath. They had never seen Vincent Carlyle speak so softly, so patiently. The tension that had once hung over the room like a heavy curtain seemed lighter now, almost fragile, but it was there, a glimmer of possibility. Midway through his meal, Vincent did something that stunned everyone. He called me over, not in his usual sharp tone, but with a hesitant, almost shy gesture. "Would you sit for a moment?" he asked, motioning to the empty chair across from him. I blinked. Me? Sit? With him? My heart raced, but I nodded and took the seat. He began, then stopped, as if weighing his words. "I don't usually do this. Talk like this. Not with anyone. Not in years." "I'm listening," I said softly, leaning in slightly. He exhaled a long, tension-filled breath. "I've built walls around myself for so long that I've forgotten what it's like to let someone in. People fear me. They flatter me. They comply because they're terrified of making a mistake. But none of them see me. Not really. I see you," I said, my voice steady. "The man beneath the walls, the man everyone else is too afraid to notice. That's who I serve, not the billionaire who scares everyone." His eyes softened, and for a moment, vulnerability replaced the arrogance and control. "You're different," he murmured. "You don't just serve. You understand. You respect me, but not because you fear me. That's unfamiliar." I smiled gently. "Because fear isn't respect. And you deserve to be seen for who you are, not just who everyone expects you to be." For the first time, he laughed, a short, surprised laugh, almost disbelieving in its own sound. It wasn't mocking or cold, but warm, real, human. And in that laugh, I could feel the walls around him beginning to crumble. The breakthrough didn't stop there. Over the next few days, Vincent's interactions with the staff changed noticeably. He no longer barked orders. He asked questions, expressed preferences instead of demands, and even offered rare words of encouragement. The staff, initially cautious, began to respond in kind. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the restaurant. He's changing." One afternoon, as I served him a delicate dessert, he looked up with an almost shy expression. "You know, you've changed the way I see things. People. Myself." I set the plate down and smiled. Sometimes all it takes is one person to stand their ground and refuse to be intimidated. He nodded, eyes meeting mine with a sincerity I had rarely seen. "And you've done more than that. You've made me want to be better. Not just for others, but for myself." The breakthrough was complete the evening. He surprised everyone by doing something utterly uncharacteristic. During a particularly busy service, a young server dropped a tray of glasses, and everyone froze, expecting Vincent to erupt in fury. Instead, he walked calmly to the scene. "Are you okay?" he asked the young man, his voice gentle, almost tender. "Take a breath. Everyone makes mistakes. It's part of learning." The room went silent. Staff members exchanged astonished glances. The billionaire who had once terrified them all was now offering guidance, empathy, and reassurance. And I sat at the sidelines, quietly proud, realizing that my small act of courage, standing my ground when I first met him, had sparked this transformation. That night, as I clocked out, Vincent called after me. "Wait," he said, and for the first time, he didn't sound commanding. He sounded human. "Thank you. For everything. Truly." I smiled, brushing my hair back and feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the day's hectic service. "You're welcome, sir. Just remember, sometimes people need to see us for who we really are to help us change." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'll remember that. And you've reminded me that it's never too late." As I walked out into the cool night air, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The breakthrough wasn't just his, it was ours. Together, we had chipped away at fear, arrogance, and walls built from years of isolation. And in the quiet glow of the city lights, I realized something deeper. This was more than a job. This was a chance to make a difference in a life that, despite wealth and power, had long been lonely. And that thought filled me with a quiet, enduring hope. The restaurant was unusually quiet that evening, but it wasn't the tense kind of quiet that had once filled the room whenever Vincent Carlyle walked in. No, tonight it carried a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something significant was about to happen. Even the staff seemed on edge, stealing glances at Vincent's table, watching for the slightest hint of his usual harshness. I arrived for my shift, tying my apron with a steady hand, though my heart beat faster than usual. Something in the air told me tonight wouldn't be ordinary. And sure enough, as soon as Vincent entered, the usual ripple of tension swept across the dining room, but this time, it dissipated almost immediately. His steps were deliberate, but there was none of the storm cloud aura he had once carried. Instead, he walked with a quiet confidence, the kind that comes from respect earned rather than fear commanded. "Good evening, sir," I said as I approached his table, keeping my voice calm. "Good evening," he replied, and for the first time, I noticed a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I hope you've had a good day." I blinked. The words were casual, almost ordinary, but the sincerity behind them was unmistakable. "I have, thank you. And you?" "Better," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "Much better." Over the course of the evening, Vincent's interactions with the staff revealed just how much had changed. He no longer barked orders. He asked questions, offered advice, and even complimented the servers when they executed a difficult task perfectly. The tension that had once made the air in the restaurant thick with fear was gone, replaced by cautious curiosity and, slowly, admiration. A young waiter named Leo approached me with a timid expression. I just wanted to say thank you," he whispered, "for, showing him we're not afraid." I never thought I'd see him smile like that, or talk like that, with anyone. I nodded, giving him a reassuring smile. Sometimes all it takes is one person to show someone the right way to connect. And it's not about fear, it's about respect. Meanwhile, Vincent was observing quietly from his table, but there was something different in the way he looked at me now. No longer with suspicion, no longer as a challenge, but as someone he trusted. I could see it in the subtle easing of his shoulders, the rare softness in his gaze, and the faint warmth that reached his eyes. Halfway through dinner service, chaos struck in the kitchen. A miscommunication between two chefs sent a tray of delicate desserts tumbling to the floor. Gasps echoed through the dining room as everyone froze, expecting the familiar storm of Vincent's wrath. But he didn't rise, didn't shout, didn't slam his hand on the table. Instead, he leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, and said calmly, "It's okay. Mistakes happen. We fix it and move forward." The room seemed to exhale with him. The staff, previously frozen in fear, looked astonished. And I realized in that moment, Vincent Carlyle had learned something profound about humility, patience, and trust. And it had happened because someone had refused to fear him, someone had stood her ground, and shown him a different path. After the dinner rush subsided, Vincent waved me over. My heart skipped a beat as I approached his table. "You've done something I never thought possible," he said quietly. "You've changed the way I see everything. People, myself, life. I thank you." "I didn't do it alone," I said, choosing my words carefully. "You had to be willing to see it too. To let someone in. That's the hard part." He studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You've earned my trust. Something I haven't given freely in years. You've shown me that strength isn't about intimidation. It's about understanding, patience, and courage. And you've made me want to be better, not just for you, but for everyone around me." I smiled, feeling a swell of pride and warmth. Then, that means all your effort to change isn't just for yourself. It's for them too. For the staff, for the people who had to tiptoe around you. You've given them something they've never had, a leader who inspires, not frightens. He chuckled softly, a sound so rare and genuine it sent a ripple through me. And it started with one person, you. I don't know how I can ever repay that. You don't need to, I said, my voice soft but firm. Just continue to be who you're learning to be. That's enough. That night, as I walked out into the cool night air, I felt a profound sense of closure and hope. The turning point wasn't just about him learning to trust. It was about the transformation that happens when someone refuses to bow to fear, when someone meets arrogance and cruelty with patience, courage, and understanding. Vincent Carlisle had begun to change, not because he had to, not because anyone demanded it, but because someone had shown him the strength of standing firm with integrity. And in doing so, he had become more human, more relatable, more open than anyone had dared to hope. The restaurant would never be the same again. The staff, once living under the shadow of fear, now worked with confidence and respect, inspired by the change they had witnessed. And somewhere in the quiet glow of that evening, I realized that my small act of courage, the decision to stand my ground, had sparked a ripple effect far greater than I could have imagined. Tonight was the turning point. And from here, everything would only get brighter. It was a Saturday evening, the kind of evening where the city lights glimmered like 1,000 little stars scattered across the streets. La Bellevue buzzed with its usual energy, yet there was a feeling in the air that was different, lighter, warmer. The tension that had once clung to the restaurant like a heavy fog had lifted, replaced by anticipation, respect, and quiet pride. Vincent Carlisle arrived as usual, impeccably dressed, but the aura he carried tonight was not of intimidation. It was calm, approachable, even friendly. His eyes scanned the dining room, and for the first time, he didn't command silence or respect through fear. He earned it through presence and quiet confidence. I was assigned his table, of course, and when I approached, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit," he said simply. No test, no challenge, just a simple invitation. I hesitated for only a moment before taking my seat. The staff glanced in our direction, curious and cautious, but the way he greeted me now sent a ripple through the room. Something had changed. Something fundamental. "I wanted to do this," Vincent began, voice soft but steady, "because I owe you more than I can ever say. You didn't just serve me. You saw me. You didn't flinch, you didn't run, and in doing so, you reminded me who I am beneath all the armor I've built." I felt my chest tighten. "I just did what anyone who believes in doing their job with integrity would do," I said gently. "You helped me in the process too, by showing that change is possible when someone's willing to listen." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I've spent years alone behind walls of fear, arrogance, and expectations. But you taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness. That trust isn't something to fear. That respect can exist without intimidation. And because of that, I see a world differently now." For the first time, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes, a softness that had never been there before. The kind of human warmth that no amount of money or power could buy. Across the dining room, the staff exchanged astonished glances. They had watched this transformation unfold over the past weeks, but seeing it fully realized tonight left many of them quietly moved. Vincent Carlisle, the man who had once been the embodiment of fear and control, was now approachable, kind, and thoughtful. The air itself seemed lighter, the restaurant somehow brighter. "You've changed more than me," I whispered almost to myself. "You've changed the whole place." A small smile touched his lips. "I hope so. That's the real reward, isn't it? Seeing that we can do better. That we can be better, not just for ourselves, but for those around us." The night wore on with a warmth that had been absent before. Vincent engaged in conversation with the staff, asking about their lives, their families, their dreams. The young servers laughed freely without fear, and the chefs worked with a sense of pride and collaboration that had been impossible before. Even Marco, the veteran waiter who had initially warned me about Vincent, shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "I never thought I'd see the day." During a quieter moment, Vincent leaned slightly toward me. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think that no one could ever understand me. That people only wanted my money, my influence, or the status I carried. But you proved that real connection exists. That people can care about you, not your wealth. And that lesson will stay with me forever." I felt a lump rise in my throat. That's all anyone wants, isn't it? To be seen, to be understood. He nodded, And tonight, I finally feel that. Not just with you, but with everyone here. And it's a feeling I don't intend to forget. As I walked to serve the next table, I felt a warmth spreading through me, a sense of accomplishment, of purpose, and of deep connection. The transformation wasn't just his, it was ours. Together, we had dismantled years of fear, arrogance, and isolation, brick by brick, with patience, courage, and understanding. By the end of the evening, Vincent stood to leave. He approached me quietly. "Thank you," he said again, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Not just for serving, but for teaching me, for showing me the strength in standing firm, in believing in people." I smiled, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. "You've taught me too," I whispered, "that sometimes even the hardest walls can come down, if someone is willing to meet you halfway." He nodded, a genuine smile lighting his face. "And I will carry this lesson with me, always. You've made a difference, not just in my life, but in the lives of everyone here." As he walked out into the night, I watched him go, feeling a quiet joy. The staff clapped softly, a gesture of respect, appreciation, and acknowledgement of the journey we had all shared. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Courage, patience, and empathy could change even the most intimidating person. They could inspire respect, transform fear into trust, and create bonds that money could never buy. That night, the restaurant felt alive in a way it never had before. Vincent Carlisle had become more than a billionaire. He had become a man who could be admired, respected, and even loved. And I knew deep in my heart that standing my ground had done more than earn his respect. It had sparked hope, kindness, and humanity in a place that had long been shadowed by fear. And in that glow of quiet triumph, I smiled, knowing that some lessons like courage, understanding, and compassion have the power to change lives forever.